How did you celebrate Labor Day? That's the day that we pay homage to the American worker. I personally was celebrating that day, just remembering the thing that we do that kind of protects the promises that have been made to those American workers. September 2nd, 2024, Labor Day this year was exactly 50 days to the date from September 2nd, 1974, also a Labor Day, when this little thing called ERISA was signed into law. Some of you have probably never heard of ERISA. They say that ERISA is the law that no one's ever heard of, but it impacts every American household. Um, ERISA, ERISA, it's the Employee Retirement Income Security Act of 1974, as amended. It's one of the most bipartisan things in Washington, but it wasn't necessarily starting that way because Republicans in 1974 were desperate to have something positive to run on. And so they wanted to introduce this thing that would protect the American worker. That's all because back in 1963, we have the story of Studebaker filing for bankruptcy. That's the car company. It goes out of business, and Studebaker's pension plan is just a series of broken pension promises. Over the next decade, between 63 and 73, there were just a series of different provisions that were introduced, which collectively kind of came together in what we now know of as ERISA. NBC, by the way, ran a special in 1972 called Pensions, the Broken Promise, which really turned public support in favor of this type of legislation. President Richard Nixon, as you might recall, was forced to resign on August 9th of 1974. So he resigned on August 9th. On September 9th, on 9/8, is when President Ford pardon Nixon. And some historians say that Ford's first major act or his first thing in office was to pardon Nixon. That's not actually true because 6 days prior to that, on September 2nd, they signed this bill called ERISA. I would argue 50 years later, that's actually the thing that's had the big lasting effect. An entire industry has been built up around this thing called ERISA. ERISA is a really big fat deal. Retirement plans, pension plans had very few protections prior to ERISA. Each state could have their own rules about how a plan should operate and how to protect that plan. ERISA standardized all of the fiduciary laws across the land. In fact, what it did, maybe most importantly of all, is it established a federal law preemption that would override any particular state regulation. Look, I know there's a lot of critics. Some people have called ERISA every ridiculous idea since Adam. So we hear the critics. We know ERISA is not perfect, but it's absolutely crucial for American workers. We take some of this for granted now, but prior to ERISA, a company could do all kinds of crazy things. You could even have like a 20 or 30-year vesting schedule before you could actually have any type of retirement benefit. And some employers would actually let their employees go months before becoming vested, and they would have nothing to show for it. Or if a company filed for bankruptcy, oh well. It's the Employee Retirement Income Security Act, okay? But prior to ERISA, employees were not secure in the promises that had been made to them. ERISA also established fiduciary duties. It required plan fiduciaries to act exclusively in the best interest of plan participants and their beneficiaries. So when President Ford signed this into law, it wasn't quite as big of a deal back then. I mean, there were only maybe 30 million Americans or less that were even impacted by the private retirement system, which held about $130 billion in assets. Today, ERISA covers over 150 American households with, we estimate, 765,000 plus retirement plans. And in excess of $25 trillion are actually in the private retirement system. I know we hear critics that say it's not working. The private retirement system is not working. 401ks are not working. You know, the Labor Department recently reported that $322.5 billion was dispersed to retirees above what was contributed. So I think it's working for an awful lot of people. Some critics who don't know their history very well will say we should go back to the good old days when everybody was covered by a pension plan. That's a myth. There weren't as many pension plans as you might imagine. The 401ks and 403bs of today cover way more Americans than the pension plans did of yesterday. So it's working. It's not perfect. We know it's not perfect, but it's working pretty well. There's still a retirement gap that we're trying to close, and we're getting a lot of progress thanks to this little thing called ERISA, the Employee Retirement Income Security Act of 1974, as amended. We have to add that part because, man, this thing has been changed a lot. In a largely bipartisan, bicameral effort, we just keep tinkering with this thing on Capitol Hill. I was in Washington this summer on Capitol Hill meeting with the legislators that are actually making the changes and already speculating as to what might be included in Secure 3.0. So the question is, if ERISA is working, as I would contend that it is, why don't we just leave it alone? Well, because we have to get it right. We have to keep tweaking with this thing until every American is covered, until there is no retirement gap, until no American worker is left behind. We have to keep improving this because so many people are counting on it. There's so much more that we could say about ERISA on its 50th anniversary. Like, for instance, the little known fact that ERISA actually also covers your healthcare benefits. That was something they really had to work to try to communicate for a while because retirement income is right there in the name of the law, right? But it actually, what it does is provides protection for all employees and not just over their retirement income, but it protects the benefits of any employee benefit, and that includes your healthcare as well. But I'm going to stick to the retirement talking points since those are actually the ones that I know. So anyway, workers were resting at home this past weekend, maybe barbecuing with friends, probably not working. And you know what? There wasn't a smidge of concern about their employee benefits. Somebody on my team was asking, like, why 50 years ago were they signing a bill on Labor Day? As if, that's the day nobody works. But that's exactly the day that you sign into law something that protects the American worker. So look, ERISA, not perfect, but ERISA is pretty nifty at 50 and still doing a pretty good job. So happy birthday, old boy.